But at the same time, Chinese home prices in September just fell for the first time in 6 years. Eunice Yoon is live in Beijing for us with the multiple problems facing the property market. Eunice?
Thanks so much, Kelly. Well, Chinese home buyers don't yet have the conviction that UBS does. The price declines across 70 cities was less than 1% on the whole, but it does add to the concerns about the outlook for a real estate sector that Goldman Sachs has estimated it powers about a quarter of GDP. And of course, that's already shaky because of all the trouble of the debt-laden property developers such as Evergrande.
The debt crisis facing Chinese property giant Evergrande, the firm, which reportedly has liabilities totaling $300 billion, facing some key bank repayment deadlines this week with $100 million in interest due on Thursday. There have been warning signs about the debt pile growing more and more over the years. How much of what we're seeing right now with Evergrande is specific to the firm? How much of it you think is a sign of things to come in this space?
If you've been keeping up with the news recently, you may have heard something like this about China. They have some sort of real estate bubble, and then one company, particularly Evergrande, and its bankruptcy will somehow lead to housing prices falling across China, and that leading to some sort of economic collapse. But the reality is, this is complete nonsense, and it's perfectly reflective of capitalists in the United States of America not understanding the socialist system that China has. You see, what's happened with the Evergrande company in China in terms of real estate is that they overinvested and had a lot of debt. China saw that as a fundamental risk and then intentionally put in place laws to limit debts that were lower than what that company had. This forced that company to unload a ton of its debt and put in a position now it's facing bankruptcy. Now you might say, oh my god, a giant real estate company facing bankruptcy. We've heard this story before. But the truth of the matter is, China let local government know before this happened that they were going to let this happen. And they made sure that local government, local businesses knew that Evergrande was going to collapse before they did anything. The reason why they did this was so that those institutions could make sure that the houses that were built and developed would actually be provided to people. All of the housing that was actually developed is supposed to be taken care of to the point where people can actually use it and live in it, instead of sitting empty while they figure out all the bankruptcy processes. Now, this is very different than the way that we treat housing in the United States of America, and there's a very simple reason for that. Because like this person says,
President Xi had actually penned an essay talking about how important it is for China to push through common prosperity and meet its common prosperity goals. And he actually mentioned real estate, essentially saying that what he says all the time, which is that homes are for living and not for speculation.
That's right. In China, their approach towards housing is not to treat it as an investment, which is why what these news reporters are saying is completely ridiculous. The idea of people using a house to build wealth is exactly what people are not supposed to do under the Chinese system. And in my humble opinion, I think that's the correct moral approach to housing. The housing that you have shouldn't be considered a future investment to maybe sell later on. It should be seen as something that is valuable to you now as a place to live. And it is actually a good thing that housing costs remain low. You see, China actually has a 90% home ownership rate. That's very significant because it means that people actually own the homes that they live in. Sort of. People own the homes in every respect except for, of course, the respect of keeping it as an investment vehicle. By putting limits on what people are allowed to do with real estate, China's trying to make sure that their housing remains affordable even as their economy continues to grow. Their goal is to increase wages while housing costs stay roughly the same. That is how China is working to build wealth for the people. And while China definitely does have some difficulties and struggles, that is generally speaking what is happening. But in the United States, we treat housing as an investment vehicle. And because of that, we have skyrocketing rents and skyrocketing mortgages. And yes, it might look and feel nice as an individual to see the value of your house increase, and then eventually you can sell it and make money. But that leaves the next generation sandbagged with a ton of cost in terms of getting access to any type of housing at all. Really, when houses increase in value, it only generates wealth for one generation and robs the next generation. inflation. China is trying to avoid that by keeping housing costs low. So when you see the government of China intentionally breaking apart one company that is treating housing as a speculative asset, we need to understand this not as reflective of some potential collapse of the Chinese housing market, but as the government squashing something that they view that threatens the stability of the housing market. Their goal is not for the value of housing to continuously increase. Their goal is for more people to continuously access the housing that they need. And if you recall, back in 2013, people were trying to predict the collapse of the housing market in China.
Then what'll be the next global market to melt down after the US and Europe? Some are looking nervously at China. One sector the authorities concentrated on was real estate and construction. But that may have created the largest housing bubble in human history. If you go to China, it's easy to see why there's all the talk of a bubble. We discovered that the most populated nation on earth is building houses, districts, and cities with no one in them.
Remember, China had this giant endeavor to make sure that they built a ton of houses, which led to essentially entire cities being empty. But they were only empty before China saw the population growth that was already happening. And when people started growing up, graduating high school, graduating college, and needing housing of their own, they had places to move into without having to wait. You see, China has a planned economy. And so it's very important to remember this. And it's shocking that more American journalists don't understand this reality. So no, China's economy is not going to collapse because of this one situation with Evergrande or even the general situation of debt overall. China is taking the lead in explicitly setting debt caps lower than what this company was leveraged at in order to make sure that they weren't over-promising profits on housing, because they're operating on a principle of people not being allowed to make that much of a profit off of housing in the first place. The only people that are really getting the short end of this stick here are the American investors who didn't see this coming, despite the fact that the Chinese government has been pretty clear about their intention of limiting profits of giant companies and their ability to speculate on housing. Ben Carollo with Rebel Headquarters. You can catch my show Galaxy Brain on the Young Turks Twitch channel every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to stay up to date with my content.